December 16, 1944. From 5:47 a.m., Ardennes Forest, Belgium. A lone U.S. Jeep skids through frozen darkness, two crude bazookas welded to its frame like surgical instruments grafted onto bone. The vehicle weighs 2,300 pounds. The Panzer hunting it weighs $120,000. One rocket costs $12. The German tank costs $100,000 and requires a factory. Yet, somehow in 3 minutes, this impossible mismatch will decide whether $4,000 encircled Americans live or die in the snow. Inside, Private Collins is 19. His hands shake not from cold, but from the knowledge that one misfire means his team vanishes into white silence. His sergeant loads the second tube with fingers too numb to feel if the rocket's seated properly. The driver's foot hovers over the accelerator, calculating the exact millisecond between firing and fleeing. They shouldn't be here. This vehicle was built to carry mail. The bazooka was designed for one man's shoulder, not mounted on wheels racing towards steel, designed to crush entire infantry battalions. If they fail, the Bulge tears open. Thousands die. The Western Front collapses into chaos. If they succeed, they prove something doctrine says is impossible, that desperation and welding torches can kill what factories built to be invincible. How did a courier vehicle become a tank killer? And what drove ordinary men to transform impossibility into the only weapon that could save their brothers? Rewind to January 1943, Italy. The Allied advance toward Rome dies beneath cliffs carved into fortress lines. The Gustav Line, Monte Cassino, mountains that don't just stop armies, they devour them. American Shermans bog down in mud that swallows tracks whole. Narrow goat paths twist upward where no 30-ton tank can follow. Artillery crews angle their guns until barrels point nearly vertical. Still can't reach bunkers carved into solid rock 500 feet above. German machine guns nest in stone alcoves invisible until muzzle flash lights up the killing ground. Infantry advance at dawn. By noon, medics can't keep pace with the dying. By sunset, officers write letters to families they'll never meet, explaining how their sons fell to enemies they never saw defending ridges that don't appear on any map worth the name. The math is simple and vicious. Every 100 yards costs 23 lives. Every ridge demands a platoon. Every bunker requires artillery that can't elevate high enough, or tanks that can't climb steep enough, or air support grounded by weather that turns mountains into clouds. The terrain chooses the defender, always. Medical tents overflow, supply lines stretch thin, casualty reports read like execution lists. Entire companies vanish into cliff faces and never reappear. The problem isn't courage. American infantry have that in abundance. The problem is physics. You cannot shoot what you cannot reach, cannot kill what you cannot see, cannot advance when every step forward puts you in a crossfire designed by stone and gravity. By late 1943, the M1 bazooka arrives, a hollow tube that fires a rocket capable of piercing 3 inches of armor at 50 yards. It gives infantry a weapon against German half-tracks and light armor. But it's a death sentence in practice. Fire once and you've announced your position to every German gun within 200 yards. You have maybe 60 seconds to displace before mortars bracket your location. 90 seconds and machine guns rake everything that moves. 2 minutes and you're either running or dying. There's no third option. The Germans respond with the Panzerschreck, heavier, longer range, deadlier. It outreaches American bazookas by 30 yards and punches through an extra inch of armor. The technological balance tips back toward defenders who already hold every other advantage terrain provides. Meanwhile, Jeeps get thin steel plates and sandbags. Mechanics weld scrap metal to doors, hoods, anywhere that might stop a bullet. It's theater. Psychological comfort. One 3-second burst from an MG-42 firing 1-200 rounds per minute shreds steel canvas sandbags, flesh-bone hope. The quarter-ton vehicle becomes a coffin that moves at 50 microrms until it doesn't move at all. Italy's mountains force a choice that doctrine never prepared anyone to make adapt to terrain that kills conventionally, or accept that every advance will cost more blood than the last, until there's no blood left to spend. Some units begin crude experiments, mount bazookas on Jeep frames, weld pivots, try to create mobile firepower that can go where tanks cannot. The first attempts kill Americans as efficiently as Germans. Rockets jam in sleet. Launch tubes crack from recoil forces never calculated. Crude mounts collapse mid-battle. Crews get pinned by machine gun fire before they can aim properly. Some Jeeps flip from unbalanced weight. Others explode when stray bullets ignite ammunition stored too close to fuel tanks. But the experiments continue because the alternative is worse. Then comes the moment that strips away all illusions. A 6-man patrol encounters a Tiger tank on a mountain road barely wide enough for the monster. Vertical rock walls on both sides. No retreat possible. The trail behind them is under German artillery observation. No cover available, just stone that ricochets bullets and cold air that carries every sound straight to enemy positions. The bazooka operator fires from 40 yards. Textbook range. Proper angle. Steady aim despite fear that makes his hands shake. The rocket bounces off sloped frontal armor like a stone skipping across water. The Tiger's turret begins its slow, inevitable traverse toward them. 5 Americans run. The bazooka operator stands frozen, unable to process that he did everything right and it meant nothing. The Tiger's 80mm gun speaks once. 6 men become a casualty report and a question that haunts every unit still fighting in those mountains. If our weapons can't kill their armor and our armor can't reach their positions, how do we fight a war where terrain and steel have already decided the outcome? Pressure climbs. Spring 1944. The Italian campaign becomes a meat grinder measured in names that will never grow old. Commanders demand speed. Infantry answer with corpses. We can't move faster than our weapons allow, and our weapons can't reach what's killing us. Tanks arrive 3 hours after the battle starts. Artillery lands 2 ridges behind where Germans repositioned an hour ago. Air support circles overhead useless because forward observers are already dead and no one else knows where to call the strikes. By the time support arrives, German positions have melted into new caves, new bunkers, new kill zones. The bazooka gives infantry a theoretical chance against armor. In practice, it's a suicide weapon that announces your location the instant you fire. 60 seconds later, mortars erase the spot where you stood. 90 seconds and you're either running through machine gun fire or bleeding out in rocks that will hide your body until spring thaw. Then the Germans deploy heavier Panzerschrecks that outrange American bazookas by 30 critical yards. German teams kill from distances where American rockets fall harmlessly short. Infantry watch their bazooka crews die trying to close gaps that artillery should cover but can't. That tank should suppress, but won't. That air support should eliminate, but doesn't. The technological gap becomes a killing gap. Jeeps offer speed but zero protection. A driver in Italy learns to calculate survival in fractions. How many seconds from standstill to 30 miles? How tight can I turn on gravel before losing traction? How many bullets can canvas and quarter-inch steel stop? The answer is always the same: not enough. Never enough. Mechanics weld thin plates scavenged from destroyed German vehicles. They pack sandbags around seats. They pray to gods they stopped believing in 3 months ago. It doesn't matter. One burst from an MG-42 won 200 rounds per minute. Every 5th round, a tracer turns the Jeep into shredded metal and meat. Drivers learn to recognize the sound like canvas, tearing but wetter. Passengers learn there's no such thing as cover inside a vehicle made of hope and sheet metal. The quarter-ton truck becomes a rolling coffin that just happens to move fast before it stops forever. In June 1944, Normandy adds new nightmares. The Bocage country transforms every hedgerow into a fortress. German Panzerfausts ambush Shermans from distances so close, crews don't have time to traverse their guns before dying. American infantry lose lieutenants faster than West Point can graduate replacements. Back in Italy, desperation forces innovation that doctrine would never authorize. Units mount bazookas on Jeep frames using crude pivots welded by mechanics who learned their trade fixing tractors, not building weapons platforms. The assemblies jam, misfire, collapse under recoil forces no one properly calculated because there's no time for mathematics when men are dying now. Rockets freeze in sleet seas in their tubes. Launch rails crack. Crews get pinned under machine gun arcs before they can properly aim. Some Jeeps explode when ammunition cooks off from tracer rounds punching through thin steel. The experiments kill Americans and Germans in roughly equal numbers. But the concept refuses to die because it solves one problem that nothing else can speed at the exact moment of contact. A Jeep with bazookas can reach German positions before tanks lumber into effective range. It can fire displace and vanish before return fire adjusts, when it works, which is rarely, but rarely is better than never. The 82nd Airborne and various cavalry reconnaissance squadrons begin testing variations in secret, not through official channels, but through sergeants who've buried too many friends and mechanics who refuse to watch good men die for lack of imagination. First trials are catastrophes. Recoil flips tubes clean off their mounts. Rockets cook off inside damaged launchers, immolating crews. Jeeps get trapped in German kill boxes with no armor, no escape, and enemy infantry closing from three sides. Survivors stagger back with burns and shrapnel wounds and stories no one wants to hear twice. Yet pressure forces refinement. By August, mechanics mount dual bazookas, one on each side of the chassis. The logic is brutal. If one tube jams or one rocket fails, the second might save your life. Maybe. Fast volleys before displacement. Rapid movement before German mortars can calculate your position. But the tempo keeps accelerating. A recon patrol, 4 men in a Jeep with dual-mounted bazookas, encounters a Tiger tank on terrain so narrow the German crew can't angle their hull to maximize armor slope. It's the only advantage the Americans will get. It has to be enough. The Tiger's 88mm gun can kill a Sherman at 1,000 yards. A Jeep at this range isn't combat. It's target practice for crews who've been killing Allied armor since North Africa. The American crew has one chance, one volley, then nothing but smoke, prayer, and the question of whether dying fast is a mercy or a curse. The sergeant makes a decision that violates every survival instinct. Both tubes, turret ring, fire together. They do. One rocket sparks off sloped armor and tumbles into rocks. The second, by luck, providence, or the desperate mathematics of men with nothing left to lose, punches through a vision port. A gap the width of a man's fist. A weakness German engineers never imagined mattered because who would be insane enough to attack a Tiger in a Jeep? Americans would. When the alternative is watching brothers die, the Tiger burns. The patrol survives. Word spreads faster than official reports can travel. Not through command channels or after-action summaries, but through desperate conversations in aid stations and field kitchens and foxholes where men trade rumors like currency. A whisper becomes doctrine: mount more tubes, fire more rockets, move faster than death can aim. Because when every second separates living from dying, adaptation stops being innovation and becomes the only language survival understands. Field mechanics wage a chess match against German engineering, except the pieces bleed and the board kills you for mistakes. Opening move: Italy. Mechanics mount dual bazookas to Jeep chassis, one tube per side. The logic is savage in its simplicity. If the first rocket fails, jams, or misses, you have exactly 2.3 seconds before the enemy gun swivels towards you. That second tube might buy you life. Might. German counter-move: deploy more armor into mountain passes. Stu-G-Thrun assault guns, Panzer IVs, and the Tiger, the 60-ton nightmare that haunts every infantryman's sleep, the machine that laughs at weapons designed to stop it. American mechanics respond with something doctrine says is impossible: quadruple racks. 4 bazookas welded to a single Jeep frame. The weapons platform weighs more than the vehicle carrying it. Engineers, men who fixed farm equipment before the war, calculate angles on scrap paper, reinforce suspensions with metal scavenged from destroyed German vehicles, adjust for recoil distribution using mathematics learned from trial error and the bodies of crews whose calculations were wrong. The tests happen under fire. There are no second chances, no safe ranges, no controlled conditions. But it works. Italy adopts the 4-tube configuration because saturation fire solves what precision cannot. Multiple rockets hit target zones before enemy gunners can traverse 60 tons of turret. In the narrow streets of hill towns where Shermans can't maneuver, that 3-second advantage separates living from dying. Every single time. Technical evolution accelerates because it has to. The M9 Bazooka arrives with improved warhead design. Penetration pushes past 4 inches, finally enough to crack the side armor of most German tanks at optimal range. Effective distance stretches to 150 yards under perfect conditions. Though combat is never perfect and crews firing at 75 yards pray their rockets fly true because they won't get second shots. The weapon gives American infantry parity with German Panzerschreck teams. Not superiority, not dominance. Just a fighting chance, which is more than they had yesterday. Jeeps evolve alongside their weapons because adaptation is survival's only currency. The Willys MB proves ideal through brutal selection, light enough to accelerate fast, powerful enough to handle mountain trails, simple enough that mechanics can modify them using hand tools and desperation. The all-wheel drive system goes from standstill to 30 mph in under 5 seconds. Top speed hits 50 mph on paved roads, though combat runs happen at half that, through mud that grabs tires and snow that hides craters and rubble that tears axles. The low profile becomes tactical advantage. A Jeep hides behind terrain features that expose a Sherman. It moves through forest trails where tanks bog down and die. In urban combat, it appears from side streets like a hunting cat fires, vanishes before German crews process what happened. Crews weld front guards to deflect shrapnel. Some units add armor plates, scavenge from knocked-out Panthers, turning enemy steel into American protection. Others mount 30 caliber machine guns for suppressive fire. Not to kill, but to force enemy heads down long enough to aim the bazookas at armor seams where plate meets plate and welds concentrate stress. Doctrine shifts from theory written in manuals to practice written in blood. Reconnaissance squadrons officially adopt the tactic by late 1944. Standard procedure becomes 2-man teams, minimum driver and gunner. Approach concealed using terrain. Identify target. Volley fire at vulnerable points, turret ring where rotation mechanisms expose themselves, engine deck where armor is thinnest, lower glacis where angle defeats slope. Then displace immediately. Never remain stationary more than 5 seconds after firing. German crews learn fast. Their response time drops from 20 seconds to 12 to 8. 8 seconds is all they need to kill you if you're still there when their gun swings around. The survival rate is terrible. Jeep crews become priority targets. German infantry learn the sound of Willys engines, the specific pitch that means mobile anti-tank weapons approaching. They learn to watch for dust trails in dry conditions, track marks in snow, anything that reveals position before the Jeep reveals itself. One well-aimed rifle shot through the windshield frame kills the driver. The gunner survives just long enough to watch the Jeep coast to a stop before German infantry arrive. But the tactic forces German armor to adapt, and adaptation means their doctrine is breaking. Tanks begin traveling with infantry escorts, slowing their movement, reducing their flexibility. Convoys tighten intervals, making them vulnerable to saturation fire they spaced out to avoid. German reconnaissance improves, pulling resources from offensive operations to defensive posture. The presence of Bazooka Jeeps changes how the enemy moves, where they position, how they calculate every tactical decision. An improvised weapon becomes a strategic factor that appears in German after-action reports and intelligence summaries. By January 1945, multiple American units field dedicated Bazooka Jeep sections. The 17th Airborne Division deploys them in the final push across the Rhine. Cavalry recon squadrons use them as screen and destroy elements ahead of main forces hunting German armor before it can mass for counterattacks. Recon units weld front guards and shield plates. The Jeep transforms from messenger to hunter, a vehicle that appears in your kill zone before you realize there's a kill zone. Engineers experiment with mounting M18 recoilless rifles, bazooka-derived weapons with greater punch on reinforced Jeep frames. The weight penalty is significant slower acceleration, reduced fuel efficiency, increased mechanical stress. But the killing power justifies everything. A single well-aimed shot penetrates a Panther's frontal armor at 200 yards. The platform stops being improvised. It becomes doctrine written in carbon scoring and shrapnel scars. Yet every advancement extracts payment in blood. Heavier weapons mean slower acceleration, and in combat, half a second decides whether you drive away or burn. Better armor means reduced speed, and speed is the only protection a quarter-ton vehicle possesses against enemies that weigh 50 times more. The balance between firepower, mobility, and survivability remains razor-thin, and razors cut deep. The question is no longer whether the weapon works. Combat answered that question in burning German tanks and opened supply routes. The question is whether the men using it can survive long enough to matter, and whether surviving is the same thing as winning. Then comes the forbidden leap. Late December 1944. The Bulge devours American units faster than commanders can reposition. Communication breaks down. Infantry companies find themselves surrounded with no armor support, no air cover, dwindling ammunition. In a field workshop behind crumbling lines, mechanics violate every regulation. They weld 4 bazookas onto a single Jeep frame, not as approved modification, but desperate attempt to reach trapped units before German armor finishes the encirclement. Against orders. The battalion commander doesn't know until the vehicle rolls out with rockets mounted and volunteers aboard. Too late to stop. A corporal who drove in Detroit, a private who welded in his father's shop, a sergeant who's lost 2 Jeeps and refuses to die in a third without taking something bigger. They load ammunition, check fuel, test mechanisms, then drive toward the guns. The road is frozen nightmare, ice hides craters. Abandoned equipment litters shoulders, burned trucks, shattered guns, belongings scattered in snow. They pass a foxhole where 3 Americans died holding their rifles. No one speaks. Navigation by instinct. A logging trail that might bypass German observation. They're not lucky. A Stu G3 blocks the trail dug in camouflaged. Behind it, German infantry pin down an entire American platoon. Seconds to decide retreat and leave men to die or attack using a weapon that shouldn't exist against armor designed to kill them. The sergeant calls it, "All tubes, armor seams, fire on my mark." The Jeep accelerates toward the Stug. 50 yards. Germans open fire. Bullets crack canvas, punch steel, snap past heads. 40 yards. The Stug's gun traverses. 30 yards. The sergeant screams. 4 rockets shriek in ragged volley. Smoke blinds everyone. The driver fights recoil, lifting front wheels off ground. 2 miss. 1 sparks off glacis without penetrating. The 4th punches through hull seam, a fist-width weakness found by luck or providence. The Stug erupts. Secondary explosions tear ammunition storage. Germans scatter. The strong point collapses. The trapped platoon advances. The crew doesn't wait. Already accelerating, trailing smoke, leaking fuel, missing half their canvas. They expect court-martial. 3 hours later, the battalion commander meets them, looks at the Jeep, 4 empty tubes, blood-streaked crew and carbon scoring and shrapnel cuts. One question, can you make more? Orders to produce 6 by week's end. Within a week, 6 more quadruple mounts. Within 2 weeks, every recon element requests them. The improvised weapon becomes what infantry begged for since Italy. Illegal invention becomes doctrine. Because someone broke rules and survived to prove impossible could work, and desperation ignores regulations when men die. But survival in one battle isn't vindication, and the deadliest test still waits. In March 1945, Rhine operations, Operation Varsity. The 17th Airborne Division secures bridgeheads for ground forces pushing into Germany's industrial heartland. among them recon teams with upgraded Jeep platforms mounting bazooka-derived recoilless rifles heavier, deadlier. The mission race ahead identified German armor, eliminate or delay until Allied tanks arrive. The terrain offers no mercy. Stone villages funnel movement into kill zones. Every intersection is potential ambush. One intersection becomes a crucible. A Jeep crew driver gunner loader receives reports of German armor moving to counterattack bridgehead positions. Orders locate and delay. They find more than expected. A Panther blocks a narrow village street its 75mm gun, covering the only approach. Behind it, German infantry dig in. The Panther is hull down, angled using buildings as protection. Doctrine says mark position, withdraw, call support. But artillery is engaged elsewhere. Air support weathered in. The bridgehead is under pressure. Minutes matter. The crew makes a decision, defying every survival instinct, engage the Panther head-on. In a Jeep. In a street with no maneuver room. The driver rolls forward using rubble for concealment. The gunner traverses the recoilless rifle, calculating angles for sloped armor. The loader chambers around and braces for vehicle-shattering recoil. German infantry spot them first. Rifle fire cracks stone. The driver accelerates buying yards before slewing sideways, giving the gunner firing angle while exposing everyone to return fire. The Panther's turret begins to traverse. Time collapses. The gunner fires. Flame belches backward. The Jeep rocks violently. The loader chambers the second round, knowing they won't get a third. First shot strikes the turret ring, hit, not kill. Armor holds. The gun continues its deadly swing. 15 seconds to death. The gunner adjusts lower. Same target, different angle where plate meets hull, where welds concentrate stress. He fires. Steel explodes. The Panther's hull cracks open. Smoke pours from hatches. The turret stops. Internal fire consumes everything. Street falls silent, but the crew has no time. German infantry close in. Bullets punch canvas. Shrapnel from the dying Panther tears metal and flesh. The loader takes fragments to shoulder and face. The driver's hands bleed. He doesn't remember being hit. The gunner screams, "Go!" The Jeep lurches through debris and smoke. Engine coughs, misfires, keeps running. They break into open ground half a mile out. Behind them, the Panther burns. The loader unconscious. Driver barely sees through blood. Gunner holds his rifle one-handed, other arm won't respond, but the street is open. Bridgehead holds. American forces pour through the gap they created. The crew survives long enough to see medics, long enough to know their impossible attack worked. Then shock takes them and they collapse into hands pulling them from the Jeep they'll never drive again. Victory measured not in kilometers but in seconds bought, and lives refusing to accept that steel decides everything. Across Italy and the Western Front, Bazooka Jeeps knock out fortifications and armor that once stopped entire battalions. The tactic spreads faster than official doctrine can document. Cavalry, reconnaissance squadrons, airborne units, infantry recon teams all adopt variations. Some mount twin bazookas. Others use quadruple racks. A few fit hybrid configurations that defy categorization. They share one characteristic: lethality purchased with blood. The Bulge stabilizes as German offensive power crumbles. Bazooka Jeeps play a measurable role, ambushing supply convoys, destroying armor before it can mass for counterattacks, buying time for artillery to reposition. Infantry pour forward through gaps created by scout teams. Villages fall, rivers are crossed. The Allied advance accelerates, but the cost is brutal. Several Jeep crews never return from patrol. Their vehicles are found burned beside shattered launch tubes surrounded by empty shell casings and the debris of last stands. Some die in ambushes, others fall to artillery that brackets them before they can displace. A few simply vanish, absorbed by winter storms or swallowed by terrain that hides their graves. Survivors carry scars deeper than shrapnel. One corporal returns with burns covering half his face, a rocket misfiring inside the tube, cooking off propellant before he could clear the weapon. He spends 3 months in a field hospital. When released, he refuses to go near a Jeep again. Another crew bails out seconds before their vehicle explodes, hit by German tank fire they never saw coming. They watch from a ditch as flames consume the platform they've driven for 6 months. The driver sits silently for an hour afterward, not speaking, not moving, just staring at smoke. Yet the tactic reshapes frontline doctrine. By March 1945, official manuals begin incorporating lessons from improvised anti-tank jeeps. Scouts become tank hunters. Mobility replaces mass as primary tactical consideration. Speed and surprise gain parity with armor and firepower in calculating combat effectiveness. The transformation isn't instantaneous. Commanders still prefer traditional armor. Logistics officers still struggle with non-standard weapons. But the principle is established: adaptability under fire isn't doctrine violation, it's doctrine's evolutionary mechanism. Objectives are secured. Names are added to casualty lists: men who drove quarter-ton vehicles against 60-ton monsters and refused to blink first. Some receive medals. Most receive graves. The few who survive to see Germany surrender carry knowledge that never fades. They transform desperation into doctrine. But doctrine demanded payment measured in friends who never came home. The war ends. Bazooka Jeeps are decommissioned, scrapped, or relegated to motor pools where they rust into obscurity. A few end up in museums, cleaned, restored, stripped of blood and carbon scoring that marked their real history. Veterans occasionally visit. They stand silently before vehicles that look nothing like the ones they knew. Too clean, too intact, too divorced from mud and terror and impossible gambles that defined their use. One veteran touches a welded rocket mount, feeling metal grow warm under his palm. A museum guide asks if he served. He nods, doesn't elaborate. Walks away before questions require answers he spent 30 years trying to forget. Because some victories are survived, not celebrated, and the cost of adaptation is counted in names that time slowly erases. The U.S. military absorbs the lesson slowly, reluctantly, but completely. Post-war analysis teams study after-action reports from Italy, France, and Germany. They document instances where improvised bazooka jeeps achieved results disproportionate to their cost. They calculate kill ratios, survival rates, logistical requirements. The numbers challenge everything institutional thinking assumed. A jeep with bazookas costs a fraction of a tank destroyer, requires no specialized training beyond basic anti-armor doctrine, can be produced quickly using existing equipment. Its tactical flexibility exceeds heavier platforms in specific terrain, but it dies easily. The analysis acknowledges this without sentiment. Light platforms trade survivability for speed. The doctrine works only if crews accept casualty rates unacceptable in conventional armor units. Some commanders reject it entirely. They argue proper planning eliminates desperate improvisation. They're not wrong. Others recognize war rarely offers proper planning and adaptation under pressure saved lives when doctrine failed. The debate shapes Cold War thinking. Improvised light anti-armor teams evolve into recoilless rifles. The M40 106mm becomes standard equipment for mechanized units mounted on jeeps and purpose-built vehicles. Technology that delivers tank-killing firepower without conventional gun weight and complexity. TIAO missile Humvees emerge in the 1980s, precision anti-armor on light platforms tracing their lineage to mechanics welding bazookas in Italian mountains. The M151 Mutt replaces the Willys Jeep, followed by the HMMMWV. Each generation incorporates lessons from wartime modifications. Vietnam sees gun trucks, transport vehicles converted into mobile firepower using improvised armor and weapons. The lineage is direct. When doctrine fails, terrain troops modify equipment to survive. When modifications work, doctrine follows. Vietnam gun trucks echo the same principle: flexibility beats brute force. The Jeep and bazooka become symbols not of firepower, but of battlefield ingenuity. Not technological superiority, but human adaptability under pressure. Modern soldiers training with TIAO-equipped vehicles rarely know the story. Officers teaching combined arms doctrine don't reference desperate gambles in Belgian forests. Institutional memory fades, but the principle persists. Flexibility beats brute force when adaptability determines survival. The Bazooka Jeep's legacy isn't a specific weapon, it's acknowledging that adaptation under fire isn't planning failure, but a necessary survival component when plans meet reality. Decades after the last Jeep-mounted bazooka fired, that principle remains embedded in military training and doctrine. Not because anyone ordered it remembered, but because survivors understood the difference between victory and defeat often comes down to a sergeant with a welding torch encouraged to try what no manual authorized. That knowledge doesn't fade, it waits patient and quiet for the next war, where improvisation becomes the only doctrine that matters. When the guns fall quiet, a twisted Jeep chassis rests in thawing mud. Spring rain washes carbon scoring from metal. Wildflowers grow through torn canvas. The rocket tubes are gone, salvaged for scrap or kept by a veteran who needs to hold something real when memory feels too distant. The vehicle decays, slowly erasing itself from a landscape that is already forgotten. Its invention came from fear, exhaustion, and refusal to surrender to terrain or steel. 3 men welded metal under fire because doctrine offered no answer to the problems killing their brothers. They violated regulations, risked court-martial, and drove into combat against armor built to destroy them. They survived long enough to prove the impossible could work. Thousands didn't. History preserves their names in casualty reports and faded letters home, in after-action summaries written by officers who never felt recoil lift wheels off frozen ground, who never chose between running and firing when both meant death. The weapon itself is footnote interesting but obsolete. The principle endures, not in museums or manuals, but in the knowledge that adaptability is survival's prerequisite. When circumstances exceed preparation, those who adapt persist. Those who don't become statistics. Wars may be shaped in factories, designed by engineers, funded by governments, executed by machines that reduce human beings to interchangeable components. But they are survived through the hands of ordinary men who refuse to accept that existing answers are sufficient, who look at a courier vehicle and see a weapons platform, who transform a shoulder-fired rocket into mobile artillery, who refuse to let steel and doctrine decide the outcome. Their courage doesn't inspire monuments. It's the courage of mechanics working through exhaustion of drivers, accelerating toward fire of gunners, steadying their aim when instinct screams to run. It's the courage of admitting you don't know if this will work, but you'll try anyway because watching more friends die while following useless rules is worse than any risk. That courage built the Bazooka Jeep. Not heroism, not genius. Just ordinary men pushed past limits who refused to stop thinking when thinking became uncomfortable. The lesson exists: quiet and permanent human beings are most dangerous not when they're strongest, but when they're desperate enough to reimagine what's possible. The chassis rusts. The flowers grow. The war becomes history. But somewhere in every conflict that follows, a soldier looks at inadequate tools and impossible odds and asks the question that echoed through Italian mountains and Belgian forests. What if we tried something different? And in that question, the Bazooka Jeep lives still. If you found meaning in this story of adaptation and sacrifice, share it with someone who values the ingenuity of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, because the lessons of history survive only when we choose to remember them.